Tell me a story, doll. About what? Asked the doll that could walk by itself. About you, said Elizabeth. You would not be interested in me. Why don't I tell you a story about a boy in a rock band or a dragon? About you, said Elizabeth. So the doll did. There once was a girl who lived in a big house with her 3 sisters. Their father was a doctor, and when people had pain, or they had been born with one leg that was too long or too short, and they couldn't walk without bobbing up and down like they were on a ship at sea, he would put them to sleep and saw their bones to make them feel better. He was a good doctor. He was such a good doctor that he could make somebody who couldn't walk properly walk properly. It hurt them so much, and they or their parents paid the girl's father a lot of money, which was why she lived in such a nice house. She had a horse named Star because he had a blotch on his eye that looked like a star. What happened then? Asked Elizabeth, because the doll had fallen silent. People started telling lies about the little girl's father. They said that he made mistakes. They said he made mistakes. Mistakes. They said he wouldn't fix people. He would say they couldn't be fixed, but really, they could. They said when he became worried about making mistakes, his hands would shake. And to keep his hands from shaking, he would drink wine. And when he drank wine, he thought he was the best doctor in the world and did things he shouldn't have done. Things that made the patients worse. That's what they said. The father said to his daughter, "Tomorrow morning they are going to ask you if you ever saw me drinking. And it's very important that you say, no. No, you never did. Can you remember that? No, you never did." But did she? Of course. The lies were true. And the father wanted her to lie? Of course. And did she? Well, that's the story. That night she lit a candle and looked at the shadows on the wall. And she asked the shadow, "Can you see me lying to protect my father?" And the shadow said she could not. So the girl didn't. Was the father angry? The father and the mother and the 3 sisters were all very angry. And the daughter went away. Where did she live? Well, that's the other part of the story. Ever since the girl was very little, when she put her palms together and rubbed them until they were sweaty and dirty, she could make a little seed. And she didn't know why she could, and she didn't know other people couldn't. But she could, and she did. And when her family said she couldn't live at home anymore because she had refused to tell a lie, she rubbed her hands together and made dirt, and made a little seed and planted the seed, and it grew into a gigantic rose bush. And she climbed it, making careful not to cut her hand on the thorns, and slept inside one of the giant roses, which was her bed. And in the morning, when the rose opened, she became friends with a bee named Bicephalus and a butterfly named Fluttercup. I like this story. I do too. So I think if you're counting, you know that the girl in this story had 2 magic powers, right? Right. She could ask a shadow what her future was, and she could make a seed, by rubbing her hands together.
Final page. Rip it.
That's right. But then one night, when she went to bed in the rose bush, one of the sepals didn't shut properly, and she was able to peek out at the landscape of the night. It was a full moon, and leaning over the short brick wall was a little girl, just like her, but she was black, and you could see through her. "Who are you?" asked the little girl. "Are you my shadow?" Was she her shadow? She was. And she asked her shadow why she was crying. And the shadow told her where magic came from. Where? The shadow. Her magic skills had not actually been hers, and also, her father had never been a doctor. You said he was a doctor. He said he was a doctor. But he was actually a bad man who captured shadows and made them do his will. That was why he could put people to sleep and cut their bones and make them better. The shadows did it. That was why they lived in a big house and why she had a horse named Star. And that was why she had powers? Yes. The shadows gave her powers so she could fight her father and go away. And the little shadow girl who had answered her question about the future and who had given her the seed for the rosebush had been happy to help her. But now she was tired. She wanted to go. She didn't ask because the shadows owed the little girl very much, but she wanted to go. What would happen to the little girl if the shadow went? She didn't know. She knew she would lose the power to know the future, and she would lose the power to make magic seeds with her hands. Probably she would have to leave the rosebush and much else besides. But she couldn't stand to listen to the little girl crying and know that she was the cause. So she said, "I release you, I release you, I release you," 3 times like that. And even though the moon would not set for another few hours, the shadow was gone, and there she was, no shadow. No magic, no magic. No more whispering to her at night. No feeling when she was alone on a road that there was somebody with her, because now there wasn't, and there wouldn't be ever again. That's sad. Very. Now, let me see how smart you are, Elizabeth. When the little girl in my story lost her shadow, and lost her magic, and lost the feeling she was not alone, what became of her? What did she become? What did she become? She became you. She did. She became me. Because a little girl whose father is a wizard, who makes a slave of shadows, and grows up with a shadow right beside her since she was a baby, who loses the shadows, becomes a doll that walks by itself. And that's you. And that's me. But the shadow said, "Since you are such a kind little girl, we will not leave you with nothing. We will give you a power. And that power is that at night, when someone asks you for your story, you will be able to tell it. And not just that, the person listening to your story will see it." "See it?" asked Elizabeth. "Look," said the doll, and pointed at the wall. And there, in the candlelight, Elizabeth saw it all in the play put on by the shadows on the wall. The little baby and the shadow, and the beautiful house, and the horse named Star, and the father who was a doctor and his bottle of wine, and the night she decided not to lie, and the family of father and mother and sisters sending her away, and the rose bush and Bucephalus and Fluttercup, and the terrible night long ago when her doll had been asked to do the right thing. And as her eyes grew heavy, and she knew that Meredith was not her best friend anymore, and she'd be happy in her new room in her new house, she saw on the wall, in the candle's flickering light, her own shadow. And that shadow reached out and took her hand, the shadow did, and placed it on her own chest, which was just a place on the empty wall, and there she felt her shadow's beating heart.